So talking about the Mk2 kukri here. Now this was produced from 1915 until about 1944, so a good span of years. 1915 to 1917 there were still some Mark 1s being issued, but I think they were just leftover stock. So essentially they were made from 1915 up until 1944. Post 1944, if you get any, they're fake. I mean, they're still a Mark II, that's not a military version. Now, the difference between the Mark I and the Mark II were that the sheaths sometimes were black, sometimes they were still brown, but sometimes they were black. And generally speaking, they had, you can see on this, they had a carder and a chuck knife with them. One of them is essentially a little sharpening tool, and one of them is just a very small, handy utility blade. We would basically use a Leatherman or a Swiss Army knife now, but that's kind of what they had, and sometimes also a little pouch for tinder or potentially money, probably tinder. And so those tools didn't come usually with the Mark 1. I have actually seen a Mark 1 with a tinder pouch in our museum, so variations do exist. That's what you get with a handmade tool, right? So the other differences were this is a M43 version, but the blade essentially is the same. This is slightly shorter, but more of a curve than the Mark 1, so it canted down more. Perhaps that would increase your chopping power. It could have been to counterbalance it out, because what the Mark II had was a full tang handle. Now this would have been very unusual for the Nepalese at least, but more common in Western societies to have a full tang. This one's got a nice taper, but essentially the handle went all the way through, but was still shaped like a traditional version and had a metal butt cap. Now the Mark II used steel for their fittings, mainly because brass was just used for artillery and bullet shells, and it was restricted metal. So although you do see a teeny little bit of brass casing around the rivets, maybe because the steel wasn't stainless and it would rust, and so they put that round to preserve it. Maybe it was just pretty, I'm not sure. Had a butt cap and still had these bits here, although technically you don't need them in a full tang model. So the handle is still very traditional. Now this deviated right at the end when a version of the Mark II called the M43, which is what this is based on, but this has got a westernized handle, came about. The main difference there is that the M43 didn't have a ridge, so it was smooth. It still had a butt cap, but the ridge wasn't there, and the rivets were actually sunken, so they were slightly below the surface of the wood. They weren't sitting proud or even flat as these are, but subterranean, as it were. And this bit here was actually welded into the blade. So that's, yeah. So I guess the question is, why did they suddenly produce a version that had a full tang handle? Well, a couple of thoughts spring to mind. One, I suspect some of the Mark 1s maybe had the handles come off. Now, it's designed to be able to do that, and it's designed to be able to put back on, but perhaps they wanted something that was more dependable, and so they produced a version which had a full tang, and the handles are never going to come off unless they snap, and then you'll have trouble because you'll need to try and replace them, and they don't just pop off. So, and I guess the other thing is, some people perceive it as stronger. Theoretically, maybe, but realistically, probably not. Not when you consider, I mean, it's a tapered tang, it's probably got holes drilled through it as well as the rivet holes, maybe not. I suspect part of it also was due to the having to have a threaded nut. I think that would have been a challenge at the time. You had to specifically hand thread everything and make it all fit, and you've got to drill through, and then you've got to drill slightly deeper for the nut to fit in, and then screw that on, and then shave it off and file it flat and smooth it. Whereas for something like this, all you do, you get two pieces of wood, slap them on the side, drill, put some rivets in, there you go, it's done. Now the Mark II was heavier than the Mark I. About the same length, maybe a hair longer. Most of them, I think, were realistically the same length. But because it had a full tang handle, that would have been slightly heavier. And the blade, as you can see, if you look at this compared to a Mark I, it does curve more, drop more, and that could have been to counter out the extra weight that was in the handle. But overall, it was a very heavy but effective tool. It's designed for chopping. It's designed in war, and it was designed for chopping wood, building fortifications, and chopping your enemy. And thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of them were made. So they were made 1915, 1944, 1944 the Mark III came about. And we'll talk about that at another day. But yeah, so the M43 is just a version of the Mark II. It just had slightly different stamps on, slightly different handle pattern, but the blade essentially and the full tang was still the basis that formed the Mark II kukri. And it was in use for a long time, issued for thousands and thousands of people. Just a very heavy, very solid kukri. And you know, I've never seen a stick tang kukri actually break. I have seen a full tang kukri break, so there you go. Right. Hey guys, have a great day.